Payment. Part 1. Smugglers Resolve. Kui stared numbly ahead of him. It was very quiet. He could only feel the faint vibrations from the belly of his ship. No ship was ever completely quiet unless it was on the drift. Then you were usually panicking too hard to enjoy the silence. It had been a long time since he'd blinked. He dragged a hand across his face and drew a deep breath, shifting his back against the wall. Fen glanced over from where he was sitting beside him, but didn't speak. Covey flexed a few spines in acknowledgement and risked a glance at the other end of the room. His 76 crew slumped against the walls or lay on the floor. A passenger room was cramped with this many people, but no one touched the bed. That's where her body was, covered with the blanket. For now, the bed was hers, no matter how tight the room might feel. It had been 11 minutes, and still no creature had spoken. They were all criminals, outlaws, ruffians, cutting their teeth on barroom brawls and skirting the law. But this ship's kind of smuggling was rarely fatal. Prison maybe if you made a mistake, but not death. They weren't big enough for rival smugglers or federal inquiries. Kui thought she said once her family was from Finara. Multiple steps came down the passageway outside the room. The quiet ones of the Terran and another set that thudded with enormous mass. Covey scrambled to his feet, his crew following suit, facing the entrance. The Terran slid back the door and stepped into the room, motioning for his bodyguard to remain behind. He stood for a moment, observing his captives with an expression Covey assumed was neutral. His features and body were similar to the Terran, but he wasn't exactly sure how to read facial expressions. The Terran had removed his cloak, body armor, and helmet, now wearing only simple clothes with a blade at his side. Covey narrowed his eyes slightly against the bright thermals. The thought of tackling the shorter creature flashed through his mind. He didn't have claws, armor, anything except for the single blade. Covey dismissed the thought immediately. The bodyguard could rip through his entire crew in moments, and his shoulders still hurt from the shock of hitting the dense tan. There would be better moments. Captain Covey, as I feared, your paperwork is perfect. Kui frowned. What's paperwork? He said, trying to manipulate his vocal cords around the unfamiliar word. The Terran frowned back. Seems those expressions were the same. His next words were said much more carefully, which Covey appreciated because of how badly the accent affected common speak. Sorry, Terran word, authentication and identification codes, your ship's title, your legitimate cargo's inventory. Though I suppose a good smuggler should have everything perfect. The Tam made a kind of rapid concussive sound, baring his teeth again. When Kui, puzzled, didn't respond, his face faded back into a neutral expression. Unfortunately, that means I must rely on you and only you to get me through the Atlan checkpoint. I had hoped a smaller crew might have loopholes, or that you were willing to be a bit more criminal, but I guess I'm not that lucky. So, I'll need you ready when we reach at void space. The Terran's strange ringed eyes flickered past Covey for a moment behind him toward the bed. Captain, he said, his voice suddenly hard and brittle. I'll be interested to know the Desiriat who killed your crew member got off the ship sooner than he expected. Kui swallowed hard to force his nerves down. That doesn't bring her back. No, it doesn't. The Terran wasn't standing quite as straight as he was a few moments before. He started to speak, closed his mouth, swallowed, then turned and began to exit. Halfway through the door, he paused for a moment, looking back over his shoulder. His voice was very quiet and somehow rough. I'm sorry, Captain. That wasn't supposed to happen. He was about to slide close the door when Kui finally barked. Terran. He paused in closing the door, opened it a few centimeters. This is a cargo ship. I can't smuggle living creatures past an alien checkpoint. If you would just let me plot a new course, I could bypass the core. We wouldn't see government, anyone except refueling stations until your destination. I could take the FTL lanes around the outer rim. It would only be about 2 weeks longer, and you'd have no risk. I told you it must be through the lanes I specified. Covey caught the door before the 10 could slide it closed. He ignored the aggressive step forward of the bodyguard, flaring his spines and growling through his words. Terran, I saw the others of your kind back on the surface. He tried to pour menace into his speech. They're only steps behind you, and if you're caught at the checkpoint, these Terran had bones on. Then I suggest, Captain Covey, you use that as motivation to find a way to hide me through security because it sounds like you've heard the stories. The door slammed shut, but the Tan continued to shout. He strode down the passage. 'Cause they won't wait for you to get out of the way. Fen finally broke the silence. Back on that planet, I didn't believe Terran existed. There were a few murmurs of agreement among his crew. Covey stared at the deck, trying to order his thoughts. Fee spoke again, folding several pairs of arms across his torso. The time with the Slav runner near Kuringal. When Kui didn't respond immediately, he said, his voice strained. Tell me what's going on. Were those stories true or just a good way to pass the night? Kui threw up his hands. I've heard the same make-believe as you. Except remember the job with the injured spice? The guy who put us in contact with jail? Fen squinted. Yeah. He swore on his matriarch's eyes. He listened to a drunk shriek ranting about the war. Easy to hear things when you're just as wasted as the shriek probably was. The blood drained from Fen's extremities. He hissed something in his own language. You don't think those two are shriek? Kui finished for him. They matched the descriptions, horns, claws. He tapped his hip. Blade broke on the scales. Finn's jaw worked for a moment. Then what in all the stars is a Terran doing with the door slammed open and someone kicked Kov's legs out from under him? His crew stepped forward, but several blades pushed them back. Covey felt cold metal against the base of his skull and the weight of a boot on the small of his back. You're a very good smuggler, a voice hissed in his ear. Kui turned his head slowly, motioning for his crew to back off. The desert scowled back at him. Covey took in the pattern scarred into the fur. Ex-military. Fantastic. I am? Covey asked carefully. Yeah. Where's your cargo? Cargo? Kui fielded the words slowly, playing for time to think. If I don't get it, we'll start hurting. Know what I mean? A gentle press of the blade against his neck accompanied the threat. Fen took a step forward, despite the blades pointed toward him. You've seen it. Wooden construction materials contracted by I don't mean the load on your inventory. Covey played dumb. He was starting to come up with a way to play his hand. This was a transport job. Half now, half on arrival. The standard agreement. The Desert spat angry words in his own language. He smashed a boot into Kui's ribs and stepped over him, dragging Fen forward. Fen resisted and the Dret punched him in the abdomen, shoving him to his knees. Your first mate? Yeah, the edge of the Desert's blade pressed onto one of Fen's wrists. Kui struggled to gasp out a protest, holding his bruised ribs. You're a smuggler. Now you got a cargo, and a real cargo. Tell me or you first mate starts losing hands. Yeah. Wait. Kufi choked through the words. The two other Deseriat pushed his crew back, looking for a reason to use their weapons. The edge pressed harder into Fen's wrist until drops of blood ran down the blade. His first mate struggled, but two other Desreti pinned him down. Kui abandoned his plan. Stop. Alfen's screams drowned out his voice. The desert leader shoved him away and flicked his blade, spattering blood across the floor. The crew pushed forward until the mercenaries' weapons forced them back. Covey struggled to keep his voice calm. If you'll just listen to me, I'll tell. We don't have other cargo. This was just a taxi job. Fen was gasping out the words, flicking his gaze over to Kui, silently ordering him to silence. Please believe me, he begged. If we did, don't you think I'd have told you? Covey closed his mouth. The desert spun the tip of his weapon in small circles, chewing the inside of his cheek. He motioned another of his kind over, and they spoke a few words in short sentences. As the rest of his men filtered out of the room, the leader spared one more glance at Fen. Hope you don't bleed out. You got that right? Fen's voice was unsteady. Kui flexed his spines in affirmation. It wasn't worth losing. Fen managed some weak humor, wiggling one of his other hands. I got more. Kui shook his head at his first mate, his mind already working for solutions. Too late to take anything back, and Fen had provided an advantageous angle. Covey slapped his hands against the floor, rising from his knees. Right. His crew gathered closer. The captain had orders. Fen and I spent some time with a desert gun runner out near Old 46 during the border skirmishes. Picked up some of his tongue. Seems the Terran promised our cargo to these Desi in addition to the payment promised us. Fen lumbered to his feet, cradling his crudely bandaged limb. And the Desi aren't happy. No, Corey, Galoon, Palner, and Felon take Fen to the medical bay. He held up a hand to stall his mate's words. Take care of that before you have something more serious to worry about. Bulver and Mavic, barricade yourselves in the engine room. Override the bridge and hold course for the checkpoint. The two Dreddy outside the door was just thinking how lucky they were for not having to face down. Those two massive bodyguards when the prisoners started banging on the door. They took a better grip on their weapons. Back off, one yelled. The banging stopped. Please, we need medical attention. The voice was quiet and both Desert leaned in to hear. One of the Dissarit gave a muffled grunt as his knees were swept from under him. His head slammed into the door a moment later with the crunch of flesh on metal. The other mercenary spun, whipping his blade in a blind defensive slash. One with the spikes, the captain, jerked backwards, avoiding the tip of the weapon. How the captain flared his spines and he retreated a step, smuggling shipmate. Kui advanced slowly in a crouching walk. The Desert held his blade ready in one hand, the other fumbling along his side, probably looking for a mic or come to contact the rest of his band. Kui gave a small feint. His opponent twitched away, but didn't commit. There, his eyes dropped just for half an instant, trying to find the mic. Kui lunged forward, catching the wild swing on the rolled blanket around his forearm. He drove his shoulder up into the Desire's gut, throwing him up and backward to smash him back onto the deck. Kui twisted away from the flailing blade, trying to pry open the fingers around the hilt. The Desire's other hand rained blows onto his head and hunched shoulders, probably hurting himself more than Kui with the spines. A howl reverberated down the passageway as Kui broke two fingers, followed by the ringing of the blade falling to the deck. A knee drove into his side, flashing white pain across the captain's bruised ribs. Kicked the blade away just before the Disret rolled out from under him. Both creatures paused for a second, one painfully gasping for breath and the other cradling a maimed hand. Kui dove for the weapon first, but the Desire was a few centimeters closer. He had picked up on Kui's pain and was throwing the elbow of his injured limb into the ribs again and again. Kui tried to shield his ribs by curling toward his side. One blow hit hard and Kui felt a rib crack. He let out a gasp, rolling away as the pain deadened his fine motor functions. The Desert snatched up the blade, baring his teeth, advancing with a bit of a swagger. He raised the blade just in time to get blindsided from behind by another of Kov's crew. Mavic rose from the limp body, shaking his knuckles with a scowl on his face. He offered his other hand to Kui, and the captain hobbled to his feet, hissing as his ribs protested. The rest of his crew had unlocked the rune, easing Fen outside, supported by one on each side. He was pale from blood loss. A distant roar echoed through the ship, followed by irregular vibrations. Looks like the Desert had demanded their price. Kui could hear yelling in the distant clash of metal. Get the weapons and comes, and tie that one up, Kui said as loudly as his ribs would allow. Then get going. Fen shook his head weakly. The Shriek are going to tear them apart, he mumbled. Kui stood as straight as he dared, flaring the spikes along his spine. So, I'm going to make sure the Terran find what they're hunting.